patience in the meantime. Just wanted to wait a couple of minutes for a few more guests. Oh, welcome! Please join us. Feel free to sit anywhere you'd like. So to get started here, dear participants and esteemed speakers, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to NeurAlbertaTech's speaker event, natChat Social Neuroscience. Today we have the opportunity to explore the exciting and rapidly growing field of social neuroscience, where the latest discoveries in brain science are being applied to understand human social behavior. Throughout the event, we will be hearing from experts in the field of social neuroscience who will be sharing their knowledge and insights. They'll be discussing the latest studies and developments, applications of social neuroscience, as well as the potential impact on society. Joining us today are our esteemed guest speakers, including social psychologist Dr. Kyle Nash, cognitive neuroscientist Dr. Dana Hayward, and Amy's key account manager, Dr. Jay Summick. As we listen to our speakers and engage in conversations, we hope to broaden our understanding of the complex relationship between the brain and social behavior, and the ways in which this knowledge can be applied to improve our lives and society as a whole. We're excited to have you all here with us today and look forward to an engaging and thought-provoking discussion. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started. So a little brief background about our organization. What is NeurAlbertaTech, or NAT for short? We're Alberta's leading neurotechnology innovator network. We support not only student innovation, interdisciplinary collaboration, but also education in the brain-computer interface space. If you ever heard about EEG or electroencephalography, we don't necessarily develop those tools, but we definitely do have some project teams that are working on using that equipment, and we have some upcoming events which we'll present later on during the day. So, event schedule, just very briefly outlined above as follows. Very shortly, we will have the key account manager, Dr. Jay Summick, delivering a sponsor address on behalf of the Artificial Machine Intelligence Institute. Afterward, we'll continue with presentations from Dr. Dana Hayward and Dr. Kyle Nash. These will be followed by respective Q&A sessions where you'll be able to ask any questions. And finally, we'll have a brief intermission where you'll serve food and beverages, and you can stay to network and potentially even win prizes. So stick around. All right. Sponsor address, Dr. Jay Summick. Key account manager at the Artificial Machine Intelligence Institute. Dr. Summick assists organizations in identifying the appropriate AMI services to expedite their AI/machine learning progress. Jay has worked in communication, instructional design, and account management positions in higher education, nonprofit, and finally, digital agency settings. Up next, welcome, please, Dr. Jay Summick.
I mentioned to the other presenters, this is very embarrassing in that I'm wearing exactly what I'm wearing in that picture. Truth in advertising. Clip these on. There we go. I do want to say quickly, I am a doctor. I do have a PhD, not in neurosciences and not in machine learning, but I work in this field and work with these people every day. And I'm really thankful for the chance to be here and hear the talks today, and just to say a few words on behalf of AMI, the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute. I'm one of the account managers, and it is my job to support businesses in Alberta and Canada and beyond who are hungry to see, frankly, the world-changing advances in machine learning transform their businesses and transform their organizations and transform their services. I have a special interest in healthcare and biotech, so I'm looking forward to the presentations today, and I've been out at a few NAT events, and I've really enjoyed getting to know a few of you and what you do. Amy is an enthusiastic supporter of NAT because our values are so closely aligned. And this is what I mean by that. One of Amy's key values is approachability. That might sound like a funny value for a scientific organization, approachability. It's not very sciencey, not very quantitative. So why approachability? Although Amy's staff and researchers and scientists are on the cutting edge of the science of machine learning, Amy is very deliberate about staying approachable to the largest group of people and the largest group of businesses possible. Artificial intelligence has become the most important tool of our time. You know a field is getting important when your 80-year-old dad starts asking about it at dinner and texting you about what's happening in GPT, as he puts it. AI, everybody is talking about it, and Alberta has emerged as a global powerhouse in extending the reach of artificial intelligence and machine learning tools. Little old Edmonton and little old Alberta. However, in their 2023 impact report, the Scale AI Supercluster contrasted the strength of AI research in Canada, contrasted the research strength with barriers to artificial intelligence adoption across most industries and the Canadian public at large. Here's a sobering statistic from that report. Just 44% of surveyed Canadians trust AI. This places Canada in the third lowest position in the Global Trust Index, and 25th out of 26 countries, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer. Research powerhouse, and yet the general public and industries are scared of what we do. So as our community, and when I think of our community, I think of Amy, I think of Nat, I think of AIMS, the Medical Science Student Association, the Computing Science Department at U of A, our community. As our community advances the science of artificial intelligence, we need to be diligent about giving equal attention to keeping our field approachable by acting as translators, translating our research into industry impact, translating our research into patient care outcomes, translating our research into talent development, translating our research into business startups. And this is why Amy works so hard to build bridges between talent, like you, and industry, because we're working hard to cultivate trust and curiosity outside of the lab. Amy's Willow program, W-I-L-O, Willow, it's already created more than 100 work-integrated learning opportunities, Willow. More than 100 of those that placed graduate students and early career folks into industry-facing engagements and internships that those students were able to participate in while completing their graduate studies. And opportunities like those sometimes evolve into full-time employment, but regardless of whether your career path is going to lead you into a career in the lab, or whether it's going to lead you to the Dragon's Den to pitch your invention, it's worthwhile for all of us to understand something of what's involved in building or operating a business. Because strength in research, together with strength in industry adoption and strength in tech startups, these are the key to a more diverse and stable economy for Alberta and Canada. And at the same time, they're the key to the continued preeminence of our research ecosystem. Research and industry together. That's what Amy's about. And thank you for the chance to support this kind of event. And I'd be really glad to speak with any of you afterwards about the Willow program or about Amy's work in general. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jay Sumek, for that inspiring speech. It's definitely very relevant in today's age and culture, especially with the emergence of AI and its prominence recently. So up next, we will be introducing Dr. Dana Hayward, Assistant Professor at the Department of Medicine at the University of, not Department of Medicine, typo, apologies, Department of Psychology at the University of Alberta. She's also a Principal Investigator of the Visual Attention and Social Processes, or VASP Lab for short. Dr. Hayward employs eye tracking, motion tracking, and EEG technology to delineate the environmental influences, such as spatial layouts or the effect of other people, on attention, and also investigates individual variability. Up next, an overview of eye tracking and motion tracking lab studies investigating spatial attention. Please welcome, everyone, Dr. Dana Hayward.
Two mics. Okay, bear with me while I set my computer up. All right. So thank you for attending. It's really great to be here. It's been a while since I've been able to do an in-person talk about my research rather than just teaching, so it's great to see people. Today I'm going to be discussing a few recent studies that highlight how social cognitive research can be informed by gaze behavior and by movements. While I have conducted research with fMRI and EEG, I believe that we can glean important insights through measuring the ways that people look and how they move through space, which I hope to convince you of today. Okay, so gaze and body language or body movements can help provide insights into people's internal cognitions, from what one is paying attention to our emotions and our goals. For instance, what does this image tell you? Pregnant pause. Love or attraction, exactly. What about these ones? What is the kiddo doing at the bottom here? Yeah, they're sad or disappointed, right? What about these other people here? They could be anxious. They could be waiting for a while, kind of bored, nervous. Hopefully your faces don't look like that before the end of this talk. But in this case, you can very easily see what's happening internally, their emotions, their cognitions, their state, just through body language. All right, so not only can we use gaze and movement to signal something, like these babies here reaching for food or reaching for toys, but we can also use gaze and movement to conceal, such as when playing poker or playing basketball. So in the poker instance, we're actually using sunglasses, hats, etc., to purposefully conceal our gaze in order to hopefully trick you into not knowing whether I have a flop of a hand or I have something really good. And then here, this is the famous no-look pass, where your eyes are directed in one location, trying to trick your opponents while you pass in a different direction. So how can we harness the fact that gaze and motion might provide insights into behavior? Well, by tracking them using eye trackers and motion tracking equipment. Or it doesn't want to go. There we go. Okay, so in the VASP lab, we have an array of portable eye trackers. We have another one on order that's coming in soon, and we have a desktop-mounted eye tracker. So here is one of our WISIST summer students. This is a grade 11 student, and this is the pupil core. We have two of these. They need to be hooked up to a computer, so it's better for more stationary activities. And then Tuba here is wearing the pupil invisible, which is literally just looks like glasses, has a little camera on the side, and you just hook up with a cell phone, and you can walk around, and we actually have a study that we're doing walking around, and I'll show you that soon. And then this is our desktop-mounted iLink 1000 Plus. So this has the most precise ability to determine where people are looking, and we use that for our lab-based studies. We also have a motion tracking room. And so here are the two computers that we will be hooking up our eye trackers to. And this is kind of a panorama of our motion tracking space. And so you can see here, these are the motion tracking cameras. And what we do, this is T, one of our lab members, wearing the core. They're also wearing these motion tracking sensors. And what they do is they allow us to track people's movements in three-dimensional space while they're doing different activities, so we can see if they're reluctant to take a card. We're going to be playing a card game. Or if they're really quick to take a card, we can quantify that information in a continuous stream, similar to EEG, where you get continuous data. So what do we do with all of this tech? Well, we've used those techniques to answer an array of questions. For this talk, I've chosen to focus on 3 different ones that highlight some uses of eye gaze and motion. So does social cognition change based on individual differences, whether you're working with or against another person, or the location that we're in, online or in person? And so in the first study, we investigated whether looking behavior and interpersonal distance was similar for people with versus without an eating disorder. In the next study, we investigated whether competing or cooperating with an online partner led to changes in performance and mouse movements. And finally, in the last study I'll touch upon today, the one that's still going on, we investigated whether the physical context that you're in, namely online versus in person, changes the way that you look at, explore, and make decisions about various spaces on this campus. Okay, so first I'm going to present an investigation into social cognition across those diagnosed with an eating disorder, those with no formal diagnosis, but who presented with disordered eating, and control individuals, conducted with former honors psychology students Devin Heath and Nimrit Janjar. This was published in Scientific Reports in 2021. Okay. Prior work suggests that individuals diagnosed with anorexia nervosa specifically struggle with emotion recognition, social attention, and other sociocognitive tasks. So what we decided to do is investigate whether these difficulties extend beyond specifically anorexia nervosa. 32 controls and 36 individuals, half with an eating disorder, so they reported they had been diagnosed with an eating disorder at some point. This is the ED group. And half with disordered eating. So they said, I was never formally diagnosed, but I think that I had an eating disorder. They were the DE group. They participated in this study, which included 3 tasks. So one of the tasks was the gaze cueing task. The second one was they watched a passive video watching task. And then finally, we did a task to measure people's interpersonal preferred space. So this gaze cueing task here is considered a model task to investigate social attention. And here in the task, a face appears on the screen. It's a little dark, but the face is looking towards the right. The face can be looking to the left or to the right. And then a target will appear either on the left side or the cued side in this case, because the eyes are looking at it, or on an uncued side, so in the opposite location of the gaze. And the ability to shift attention in the direction of the gaze is known as a gaze cueing effect. And if you do that, you're faster for those gazed at trials, which is giving you that positive gaze cueing effect. Okay? The second thing people did is they watched a 6-minute and 15-second clip of the pilot episode of the American version of The Office while we eye tracked them. And so I have a little clip for you. I hope you can see this fuchsia dot here. Can you all see that? It's a little tricky. So this dot is representing where this particular participant was looking during the video. So you'll be able to see a little bit of what's going on. There's no audio, unfortunately, but. So you can see they're fairly often looking at the faces, right? And the stapler and Jell-O, of course. Okay, and then finally, the last task was this interpersonal space task. And what we had people do here is, based on the methods from another research group, we had a research assistant, so this was Anna in this case, start over 9 feet away from the participant and walk towards the participant. And as soon as the participant felt uncomfortable, they would say stop, and we would take a measurement from the nose of Anna to the nose of the participant, and we did this 3 times to get an index of people's preferred interpersonal space, a measure of kind of your body, your space versus others. So what did we find? For the gaze cueing task, if people show that preference for faces, then we should see a positive gaze cueing effect. And we found that only the control individuals showed a positive gaze cueing effect. The people in the DE and ED group did not. And so if we had stopped here and not measured gaze or interpersonal distance, our story would have been that social attention is reduced across a spectrum of individuals, not just those with anorexia, but those with other eating disorders. However, when you look at the data from the other 2 tasks, a very different story emerges. And so for the passive video watching task, somewhat surprisingly, we found that the disordered eating group looked at the faces during that video clip for the greatest proportion of time. I know, puzzled looks. it could suggest that there isn't an optimum strategy of how long you should look at faces during these sorts of video clips, but we're still trying to explore why this might be. And then finally, in the interpersonal distance task, we found that those who had at one point been diagnosed with an eating disorder had a larger preferred social distance as compared to the other two groups. So taken together, these tasks highlight the importance of measuring more than one thing, of moving beyond just behavioral response times in order to investigate things like gaze behavior and movements to give us more insights into people's social cognition. Next, I'm going to discuss a recent project aimed at investigating how two people interact during an online card game, developed with graduate students Helen and Jen and collaborator Dr. Craig Chapman. So in this task, people played a card game 3 times cooperatively and 3 times competitively. At the beginning of each game, players were told what their goal was. So let's say in this instance, our goal is to collect circles. Every card that you get with that particular goal will give you points, okay? Now, on each turn, one participant will draw 2 cards. Imagine we're that participant. We draw the 2 cards, we look at them, and then what we have to do is decide which one to show face up to the other player and which one to show face down. And so in this case, the green circles, the 3 green circles match our goal of collecting circles, and the 1 red rectangle does not. So let's say we decide to hide ours in the hopes that the other player will not take our card. Well, in this fictitious example, unfortunately they do, which means that we are left with no points for that turn. And then at the end of every turn, we asked the players to try to guess what the other person is collecting. What is the other person's goal? So if this was the first round, the first turn of the round, we would know that they don't want 1 red rectangle, so we can kind of eliminate this top row, but we don't know what else they're looking for, so we would guess here. And then it would go on, they would draw 2 cards, they would decide which one to show face up and which one to show face down, and then it was our job to be able to pick which one we wanted, and then again, guess, okay? All right, so most importantly, why am I talking about this? What we did is we, in real time, projected people's mouse movements to the other player. So you could see people moving their mouse. You could see them dragging the cards around, see them, how long it took them to deliberate before they decided which card they were going to put up or down, okay? This was during COVID. It's the best we could do. All right, so we tested a bunch of people, but only 96 participants, 48 dyad pairs were able to get through the full almost 2-hour study. You needed high-speed internet because you were constantly sending data to each other. And so I'm going to focus on 2 main findings, comparing performance when cooperating versus when they were competing. And so here we have the card scores. This is the number of points people got from the card scores as a function of how many turns. And remember, there's 8 turns in a game. And then here are the guess scores. That's me trying to guess what you're trying to collect. Again, points as a function of turn number. So while there was no difference in the number of points that people got from their cards, which was good because that's how we designed it, we do see a difference in the ability to guess the other player's goal. So as expected, the ability to guess the other player's goal gets better over the turns, right? I'm getting more information, so my guess score is going up. And then specifically in this condition, you can see that there's a difference between how well I can guess when we're cooperating in the teal color versus how well I can guess when we're competing. So cooperating, it was easier to guess in this situation. All right, if I'd only collected response time data and accuracy data and stuff, I wouldn't have known what that is due to. So why are people better at guessing the other player's goal when cooperating? Well, we can look at the mouse movements to help us understand. Either participants are sending explicit signals with their mouse, doing things like circling the cards that they want, or hey, like I really need a triangle, drawing the triangle with their mouse, or which you would do if you were cooperating at least, or they're quickly choosing the cards that they want because they don't have to conceal anything when they're cooperating, right? You're just playing the game, which means that they're being faster and kind of sending an implicit signal of what they're interested in picking up. So here I'm going to show you the mouse dwell times. That's a combination of how long and how much distance was traveled as a function of all the phases of the game. And so in this case, if people spend more time moving their mouse when cooperating, hitting that explicit cues, then you should see a bunch of teal in the heat maps I'm going to show you in the following slide. Whereas if people were spending more time moving their mouse during competing, so less time for cooperating, you'll see a bunch of purple. So this is the interactive moment again. Which of you think that people move their mouse more during the cooperation, doing that whole like circling cards or triangles? Hands up. Okay. Which people think that actually it's competing, or people that are competing that take longer and move their mouse more? Did you put your hand up twice? No? Okay. All right. So spoiler, do you see any teal? No, it's completely purple. So these are the different phases of the game. I draw the cards, I interact with the cards, I make decisions. We're going to zoom into the one where you see the most, and we can see a bunch of purple. So this was the layout. This is where people are taking cards, drawing them to look at them, putting them face up or face down. This is where my other cards were sitting, and that's where the other person was. And you can see that actually it's not explicit cues, but it's this implicit movement. So if I don't have to conceal anything, then I'm just quickly going to grab the cards I want. I'm quickly going to make a decision. It's okay. It's open information. I'm fine if you know what I want, because maybe you'll leave it for me if we're cooperating to get points. Whereas when you're competing, you might be slower, more deliberate, more uncertain about what to do. Okay? And you're not the only ones who thought that it would likely be this explicit cue. And so what are we going to do? Well, if we're able to show these fundamental, oh, I think I turned the, it went off for a second. Batteries were low, I think. Okay, if we're able to show fundamental differences in performance across cooperation and competition based on a very impoverished representation of another person, literally just a cursor moving around the scene, then what would happen when two people are sitting in the same room, interacting, playing this card game? To answer that question, we're currently working on the logistics of testing it in the lab. So what we're going to do is we're going to have two people, this table needs to be rotated, two people with the portable eye trackers using the motion tracking equipment to literally play that same game and see how people communicate what implicit or explicit strategies they use during a real world task. And so this will be in conjunction with honors student Maddie, independent studies student Ava, master's student Beth, so they're in Dr. Craig Chapman's lab, the other two are in my lab, and we're in the middle of getting that started now. So stay tuned. Okay, and finally, I'm going to be discussing an ongoing project aimed at investigating whether the physical spaces that we're in affect the way that we visually explore the spaces, as well as what sorts of activities we would like to do, developed with honors psychology student May and graduate student Ruby. So in this study, we had two phases. We had an online phase and an in-person phase, online last year, COVID. For the online phase, 53 participants were shown pictures of spaces on campus one at a time, and were asked to rate how likely they would do one of three activities, either socializing, which is written here, studying, or relaxing, meditating, and praying. And so they had to slide this from 1 to 7, not likely at all, to very likely. And then they were asked after that to check which of the reasons help support why they chose that option. And then there was a free-form box to fill stuff in as well. So this current semester and last semester, we've been doing this in person. You might have seen people exploring spaces with those eye trackers on. They've been going to Van Vliet and here in CSIS and sub, et cetera. We've had 21 participants so far explore 6 different spaces on campus while wearing those portable eye trackers. This is a stock photo because I can't just show random pictures of participants, okay? So they explore a space, and then we give them a similar questionnaire. What are the reasons that you rated this space? How likely are you to socialize, et cetera, in that space, okay? And we gave them roughly 6 minutes to explore the space. So we did constrain them because we have to finish in the allotted RP time. All right, so I'm going to present some analyses of the ratings that people say across the two, and then I'm going to show you some illustrations of the participant gaze behavior because we're still going through the analyses. For the online study, we found that some features mattered for participants while others really didn't. For example, and this is just some of the things, we looked at whether the items had windows or not, and we looked to see whether people rated the spaces as higher or lower with the presence of windows. And for all 3 activities, socializing, studying, and relaxing / meditating, praying, windows were preferred, okay? Went off again, sorry. For greenery, We don't care if we're in a green space when we're socializing. I guess we're just busy hanging out with our friend, but studying and relaxing, we prefer greenery. And then for inside and outside, again, it doesn't matter for socializing, but it does for studying and relaxing, however, in different directions. So when we're studying, we prefer to be indoors, and when we're relaxing, meditating, or praying, we prefer to be outdoors. Finally, discrete versus communal seating. So discrete would be like small tables and chairs. Nope. Whereas communal, sorry Kyle, get ready. Whereas communal seating is big tables. People didn't care. There was no difference. Okay, so in the in-person version, we looked at the different buildings because in each building, people only rated for one thing. And we found the ratings didn't vary at all for any of the buildings except for sub. In sub, participants would not relax there. That's the least preferred. And they're most likely to study. I don't know if that mimics what you all want to do. You want me to hold that one too?
Yeah, next time it dies, just use this one instead.
Okay. Just use all of them.
Just use all the mics.
I'm going to turn this one off.
Perfect, thank you, sorry.
It's okay. I don't know which one it is. Hold on. I think it's, yes? Is this one working? I don't know. Okay, I think that's it. All right. So, we also looked at how long people took to explore each of the spaces, and we found a significant difference. So this is the amount of time they took to explore the space, and these are the 6 buildings that they explored: Van Vliet, Sub, Agro, ETLC, ATHA, BASCA, and CSIS. And you can see there's differences in how much time people took to find a space that they would either study, socialize, or relax in. Now, when we look at the gaze map, so we actually managed to collect a lot of eye tracking data through webcam-based eye trackers using LabVance technology. And so when people relate, this was one of the pictures that was the highest rated for relaxing. And this was one of the pictures that was rated the lowest for relaxing. And the heat max, the darker color, is people spent more time looking in that section. So you can see people explored here, and especially kind of the high end of the slider. Whereas here with low ratings, they didn't really look at the picture that much before they slid on down. When we look at socializing, again, we see more looking at the communal seating area when they get a high rating for wanting to socialize here. Whereas with the low rating for socializing, there wasn't as much looking here as there was on the slider itself. And then finally, with studying, we can see actually maybe a bit of a reversal. A lot of looking at this place and being like, why would I study in the chemistry hallway? Versus, yeah, I'm going to study in this place, it looks good, right? So we're in the middle of quantifying this data. But in person, I'll show you, we have a video so you can see where the participant was looking. Now this has been sped up, so you don't have to spend a long time watching it. But this is one of our volunteers, Omnia, who's helping with the study, and this is May here. The red circle is where the participant is looking. The blue is kind of going to count the fixations. And so you'll be able to see here, it's double speed, okay? So they're putting the phone in the fanny pack, super fashionable. They're getting instructions of what to do. They have to look for a place to study. They have to put the piece of paper down when they found the spot. And now they're just kind of looking around and they're like, okay, you can go when you're ready. And so here they go exploring. I don't know if I should narrate the whole thing. But you can see how much our eyes move, which people don't really think about. They move a lot. You can see a lot of jittering. And this person is really doing a great job. Some people just kind of go straight to where they know, but they are actually taking the instructions seriously, and they are physically, exploring the space with their eyes to find out where would they go and study in sub. And they end up in that space there, in the studying space. So what we have them do is once they've found the space that they want to study in, or socialize, or relax, depending on the condition, they have to sit down, put the paper down, kind of look at it, look around so we can see what it is, and then that's it. So that's an example. So in sum, I've demonstrated that gaze and movements can help answer an array of questions, such as whether social cognition, including where we look at in our interpersonal space, change based on individual differences, yes. Change whether working with or against another person based on our mouse movements, yes. Or whether the physical locations that we're in changes the way that we look at or explore spaces and make decisions, again, yes. So we employed both desktop and portable eye trackers, along with mouse tracking, and soon the three-dimensional in-person motion tracking to help answer these questions. So hopefully I've convinced you of the utility of gaze and motion to inform social cognition. And I just want to thank my funding agencies, my collaborators, and these are some of the students that have been in the lab for the past few years. And thanks to all of you for listening. I welcome any questions. Or no questions, it's cool.
Do you have any questions for us?
So when it comes to how we engage in space, does the intent or like attitude towards who you're socializing with affect like the wayfinding? As in like the distance, not the distance, sorry, the amount of effort and engagement you have in the act of searching for like the location. Because like if you know that you are going to be engaging with someone that you already don't like, will you engage or look for a different, would you, I guess, slow down and be more considerate of your location? Or would you be more considerate if you're trying to like hang out with a friend and you want to find an enjoyable area?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for the people online, just to sum it up, the question is, if you know that you're going to be socializing with someone that you enjoy versus someone you don't, would you change your wayfinding strategy? Would you slow down or speed up? Great question, and we're not investigating that right now with this study. I have other studies where we're doing two-person dyads that are either romantic couples or best friends or complete strangers, and we're looking at how people change their cognitive approaches. But here we're just saying, imagine you want to have a coffee chat with a friend, choose a space where you would do that. And so we're hoping by saying friend, it evokes someone that you actually do want to hang out with. And so we're hoping that that keeps things constant, but we're not asking people to think of a specific individual and hold them in mind when they find the space. Good question, though. Yep.
How did you try to reduce bias when it comes to your testing and getting data? Like, were you choosing random participants, or were you sort of choosing people that were already in the research, like that are more involved in research themselves?
Yeah, so for all of the studies here, we've used research participant pool subjects. And so they're doing InterPsych 104 or 105, and they sign up for it. And then when they come to our lab, we randomly assign them to the different conditions. So it is a convenience sample. So the generalizability, we don't know, but they are randomly assigned. And so presumably individual differences are mostly taken care of. With the eating disorders one, we did recruit through research participant pool as well. And we had one version where it was, if you were ever diagnosed with an eating disorder, sign up for this one. And if you were never diagnosed, sign up for that one. So in that case, again, it was a convenient sample doubly, but we randomly assigned them. Well, they all got the same thing, right? So that was within subjects. Hand over here, yeah.
I'm not sure if the students that were, or the student that's supposed to find the study space,
Mm-hmm.
when she was, I didn't really, this was going too fast and I was listening.
I know, it's very fast.
Okay. Does it matter, like memory, for example? Like if she's walking and trying to find a space, and depending on what the space she's looking for, she already kind of has an idea. I'm trying to find a space,
Mm-hmm.
like for instance, I study somewhere quiet.
Yeah.
When she was walking, from what I could see, her gaze was like everywhere. She was looking everywhere.
Yep.
Does it matter that she already has like some preconceived ideas of where she could go? Like I'm just,
Yeah, great question. So the question is, in the example of the person walking to go and find a place to study, if you have a preconceived idea of where you want to go, does that matter? Is that going to change the data? Probably it does matter, and I could see it would likely change the data. What we've done for the first study where it was online, we asked people if they've ever been to these spaces on campus, and because there was a lot of online learning last year, not a lot of people had been in the spaces before. With the in-person version, we also asked people, how, do you usually study in this space or socialize or whatnot, to get a little bit of a sense of it. And we'll look at that kind of questionnaire self-report when we're doing more of the in-depth analyses. But I would imagine it does. We do say, please explore the space and find a place that you would insert activity here. But of course, there's going to be individual variability. I might be like, hey, I know I'm going to study above the Starbucks like here in CSIS because it's quiet over there.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, so we asked them about it, and we'll check the data after. Great question. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So the question is, in the eating disorder study, we had a different profile for every task. Like one person was higher than the others across all three. And how do we know that it's due to the eating disorder or due to other individual factors? Great question. We're not certain. We did take individual differences measures and things like socialness, and there was no relationship between the number of social traits you have and any of the scores here. It was literally all about diagnosis. But just to make sure I was clear, the people that said that they were diagnosed with an eating disorder, we didn't actually confirm it, right? We didn't have a clinician do that as well, which is why it got published in scientific reports and not an eating disorder or cognition journal, because they both kicked it back to each other. Like, this should be in an eating disorders journal, or the cognition people said that, and then the eating disorders people were like, no, this is not good enough. So we tried to sample from a large array of people, and within each of those two groups, some of them were currently experiencing an eating disorder or having disordered eating habits, and others it had been 5-10 years. So it's a very heterogeneous sample. I don't know if there's other factors that were systematically at play there, but we did, recruit people and take the people that were available for the RP pool. Good question, though. Anybody else? Oh, yep.
The eating disorder and the diagnosed ones,
Yeah.
why were they chosen? Like, why eating disorder people?
Yeah, great question. So the vast majority of research on eating disorders is specifically anorexia nervosa. It's specifically when they are in the acute phases in like day hospital or all the time hospital. And not a lot is known about the spectrum of eating disorders. And so we wanted to see if we choose from a very broad group of people who only have potentially one thing in common, then what will we get? And we started out literally trying to recruit people who said they had a diagnosis, and half the people that showed up in our sample, they're like, no, I've never been formally diagnosed, but I'm sure that I have it. So we're like, okay, well, we can't lump them all together. So we separated them that way a little bit ad hoc, but we did want to have a better representation of just community samples and maybe people that aren't in the acute stages to see, is there something still there that persists in social cognitive functioning?
So is there dieting? Because when you're in that situation, I guess starving or not, or just like obviously the amount of fuel you have in your body affects how much attention you can give to things.
Yep.
So if you have eating anorexia nervosa, for example, you're not eating as much, you have
Yep.
less energy to spend.
Mhm.
So is that where the research is about, is finding out how much energy maybe they put towards finding a solution or finding the goal that you gave them, sort of thing? Is that why they're inside this thing? Because with having the eating disorder and being sort of diagnosed eating disorder is two different levels of energy. So with less energy, probably it's like, oh, can you go find somewhere for us to, just even the idea is already
Right.
exhausting. Getting up and looking around is exhausting, and then deciding is exhausting. The whole process is exhausting mentally, physically. I'm just wondering if that's part of it. Yeah.
So the question is based on, fuel levels, and if people are in the midst of an eating disorder, do they have differences in the amount of fuel or energy they have? So of those 18 people, roughly half was past. Within past 2 or 10, 15 years ago, they experienced it. So they're eating typically and getting the normal fuel. And for those that it was currently undergoing, most of them had, I hate using typical BMI, but they weren't in a anorexic range for body mass index. And it was an array of people. A lot of them were bulimia or binge purge, so it was a total mishmash. I don't know, we didn't get how many calories they took in that day though, which probably you would want to do. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
We know to a certain degree that eating disorders also are present differently in men
Yep.
over so on and so forth. Was there any gender differences amongst those two?
Yeah, great question. I should have said it. We only recruited people who identified as female. And we did that purposefully because we knew that it presented different in males, and this had not been done before. Looking at a more diverse sample and people who weren't undergoing treatment at the time because it was a past history thing. And so we wanted to restrict it to people who identified as female, just to be consistent. And of the people we had in our group, they actually were biologically female and identified as female. That just happened to happen when we were recruiting. Great question, though. I think my time is up, but is there anybody online? We're good?
Should be good.
Okay, thank you so much.
Once again.
Okay.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. So just before we get started, thank you so much, Dr. Dana Hayward. Actually, I'm not sure if I'm able to disclose this information, but I partook in that study back in first year, and I actually very vividly remember it because it was basically an excuse for us to skip class and watch The Office. And I remembered getting, you know, once you do those studies, you actually find out through debriefing what's the purpose and what they're looking for. I don't know what I did with the paper, but for the past few years, I'm so glad I finally stumbled upon you because I was trying to figure out what was the purpose of watching The Office. So thank you so much, Dr. Hayward, for that insightful presentation. All right, so now we're just going to plug this back in. Just a second. Sorry, Cameron, can I ask for some assistance? Password? Assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Alberta. Dr. Nash's research is grounded in the neuropsychology of motivation and conflict, investigating the basic neural, motivational, and affective mechanisms of personality and self-regulatory processes. He examines the nature of threat and defensive reactions to threat, individual differences in the affective experience of conflict and distress, and self-control in decision-making. Up next, an overview of neuroeconomics. Please welcome, everyone, Dr. Kyle Nash.
Thank you. Don't worry about the typo. I'll take medicine, that's cool. They make more, don't they? All right, bear with me, one sec. So, this, that. Yeah, okay. Yes, okay. Okay, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm, in terms of research, kind of in international waters, but if I identify as anything, it's a social neuroscientist, so this is quite exciting for me to be a part of. So today what I'm going to show you is kind of an illustrative example of some of the work that I do in social neuroscience. That's working good. And in particular, focus on the domain of social decision making. So in social neuroscience, this can be called neuroeconomics. And it's an interesting area, complex area. We know that social decision making is not that easy. We're bombarded by choices. And we face decisions that range from the mundane to highly meaningful. And decision-making research in general is interested in how we process alternatives and choose an optimal action. So there are lots of disciplines that touch on decision-making. One of the interesting things is that there is little convergence across these different kinds of disciplines. One such area of convergence is a typical assumption of rational choice, that people are self-interested and they're going to try and maximize value within different kinds of decisions. And there are mathematical assumptions and models that can be made to explore these different kinds of choices based on different kinds of alternatives. However, you know, and I know, that people are not always, certainly, rational. They are often irrational, and I put those in quotes just to say what that is defined as. But people tend not to fit the mathematical models that are used to predict their kinds of behavior in social decision making. So I'm going to start off with an example of an explanation of social decision making, and this is described in the Nash equilibrium. So this is John Nash, no relation, as far as I know. So maybe, I don't know. John Nash is the subject of the movie The Beautiful Mind. Anyone seen Beautiful Mind? Right, so you know what I'm talking about. The Nash equilibrium is his famous contribution to choice, which describes that people will often, and the situation will settle based on the best response to all other strategies in that equilibrium. So this is often examined using distribution kinds of games, particularly in behavioral economics. And we can take a look at what the Nash equilibrium would say and what actually people do, right? And so in this game, for those who know, this is the ultimatum game, where people are provided, there are two people within this task. There's a proposer and a responder. The proposer is provided with a sum of money. Here we're going to say $6. And then the proposer can make an offer of some kind of split to the responder, right? And so this is the range of different kinds of outcomes that you can have in terms of the offer. And in the ultimatum game, the responder can, in a way, punish the proposer and either accept or reject the offer. If they reject the offer, no one gets anything, right? Round over. And so what the Nash equilibrium would predict is that what should happen is that the proposer should propose a 5-1 split, where they get 5, the other person gets 1, right? Based on the idea that the responder is also a rational actor, and we'll say, well, 1 is more than 0, so I'll take that. What actually happens? The actual offer tends towards fairness. And fairness is going to be an important theme in this quick talk. And so it's usually just under, but closer to a fair split. So here we're saying it'd probably be about a 3-3 split. And if the offer is unfair, actually resembling the Nash equilibrium, the 5-1 split, the responder typically rejects that kind of offer. So they will take 0 over 1. Okay? And so one of the conclusions about this kind of work is that people, they clearly care about more than just maximizing value, particularly in terms of monetary value. This is often described as social preferences. Essentially what it means is that people care about social things. And there's a great deal of heterogeneity in how people respond in these games But this heterogeneity, or these individual differences, are not that well understood. For example, one way of explaining this individual difference, or these individual differences, is using self-report or personality. But personality is often a poor predictor of these real kinds of social decisions, social behaviors in these behavioral economic games. And so part of my approach, what I want to illustrate today, is this neural trait approach. So what this involves is indexing task-independent brain function, or brain anatomy, that can then be used, indexed as neural traits, that's where the name comes from, as potential explanations for individual differences in social behavior and social decision making. These neural traits can say how people differ, right? And they can also suggest, softer term, suggest why they're different, right? And so why will be based in what we know about the brain, what the brain and these brain areas or brain functions are doing. If people differ in these kinds of things, we can understand the social behavior. Okay, and so I kind of hinted at it, but one of the things we're going to be talking about is a social preference or social aspect that people care about are social norms. And social norms are essentially ideas that groups have that outline what is acceptable, what should be done versus what shouldn't be done in terms of behavior. Deviance from social norms are reliably punished by other individuals. This can include ostracism, animosity, hostility, transgression, etc. And what these social norms do is, in general, promote social cohesion, social order. The group sticks together better, and it promotes cooperation over selfishness. And our primary focus today is the fairness norm. So it's in the name, it's a widely shared belief of fair behavior. All known societies in human history have developed some sort of fairness norm and mechanisms for norm enforcement. So typically the punishment that I was talking about. So people care about fairness. And because they care, they punish unfairness. So this helps explain, perhaps, some of the choices that we saw in the ultimatum game, where people didn't do the rational thing, right? The Nash equilibrium deviated from what people actually did. They seemed to be either following, or if they rejected an offer, punishing fairness norm compliance. And so today I'm going to show you some research on trying to explain some heterogeneity in who follows the fairness norm, who engages in fairness norm compliance. And so in this research, we essentially thought that there would be three types of people. That there would be people who follow the fairness norm voluntarily, so we call them voluntary compliers. It didn't matter if there was the threat of punishment looming or not. They care about fairness, they care about other people, they're going to engage in fairness. We also thought there might be a group we called non-compliers. These are generally selfish individuals, perhaps a little bit impulsive, controlling their emotions and their behavioral impulses. And they wouldn't care as much about the fairness norm, nor would they follow it or punish it. Finally, we thought there would be a third group who was sensitive to whether the threat of punishment was there, right? So sanction-based compliers would, if there's no threat of punishment, engage in the more selfish kind of behavior, right? Try and make as much money as they can. Whereas if there was a threat of punishment, they would then deviate to follow the fairness norm. Again, to maximize how much money they're making. Avoid that rejection. So in the current study, also published in Scientific Reports which is why I kind of laughed. We were looking at, as I said, explaining heterogeneity and fairness and norm compliance. So we first wanted to classify behavioral types, and it was going to be based on their behavior in two different kinds of games. So based on an ultimatum game, or the same game I showed you, and behavior, both as the proposer, in a dictator game. So a game where there's actually no threat of punishment. The responder is poorly named. They can't respond, right? So then the division is just over. And then we were also interested in measuring neural traits, and we used for our measure of neural traits resting state EEG, which I will explain in a minute. So we collected data from 184 individuals. This was conducted in Switzerland, and they came into the lab for 2 sessions. The first was an EEG session, where we recorded EEG during different kinds of tasks, I'll explain. And a second session, which was a behavioral session, where they engaged in these distribution games, made choices for real money within the task. So in session 1, we relied on measuring resting state EEG because it's recognized as an ideal way of capturing neural trait variance. Resting state EEG is stable, it's reliable, so the patterns in EEG while you're at rest. They're also unique. You can predict people based on the EEG signal, so who that is. And it's task independent, right? So it's more related to a baseline kind of state. It's been described as a kind of neural fingerprint. And so to get at that neural fingerprint, we recorded EEG from a 64-channel EEG headset during a rest period, 4-minute rest period. And part of supplementary analyses, I'll mention, they also conducted a reaction time task, but we'll get to that in a second. So in session 2, they then played the 2 distribution games. In the first task, the dictator task, or the no punishment condition, they played as the proposer, and all they did is they received 100 units of money and then proposed, which was ultimately, of course, had to be accepted, a share of that money with the responder. In the punishment task, the proposer was given the same amount of money, proposed a split or share with the responder, and the responder then, bless you, accepted or rejected the offer, okay? And so in terms of analyses, we had 2 goals, right? Classify the behavior and examine the neural traits. So we first entered both proposer offers into a cluster analysis, so the offers in both the punishment game and the no punishment game. We then classified people as behavioral types based on this 2-step cluster analysis, so where people were grouped in terms of their responses across the 2 games. And then we examined source-localized EEG activity at rest. Won't go into too much of the details, but what this allows, this S-Loretta technique, is allows you to estimate the cortical sources that explain the pattern of activity that's on the scalp. So there's a pattern of activity on the scalp, where is it coming from? And so we then examined, do these different behavioral types, are they explained by different neural sources? And so in terms of results, we found 3 types of individuals within this task, 3 clusters of behavior that conformed closely or nearly identically to what we predicted would be in terms of behavioral types. So in the first case, this blue group you see here, these are the voluntary compliers. What they did is they tended to share regardless of condition and share nearly at fairness levels. So it's a little bit lower when there's no punishment threat, but they were reliably higher in terms of their offers with a punishment or without a punishment in the distribution game. There were sanction-based compliers. They seemed to be engaging in a maximizing kind of strategy, where in the no punishment threat condition, almost everyone within this group kept everything, right? So they're offering nothing. They don't care. However, flip it to the punishment condition. They're aware that fairness or unfairness will be punished by the responder, and so they change their strategy and offer near fairness levels, right? So they're very sensitive to what's going on in terms of the threat of punishment. And finally, we had this weird group. We called them non-compliers. It's kind of a nice name for them. We gave them different names. They didn't seem to make sense in terms of what they were doing. Very low in both conditions, but middling under the threat of punishment. It's not really the smartest strategy. They ended up making the least amount of money, engaging in this highly selfish kind of behavior. And then in terms of neural differences, we found a couple of things. So in comparing these groups, we found that voluntary compliers were associated with, I know the bar is lower, but that's delta activity. So it means higher levels of cortical activation. So voluntary compliers were associated with higher levels of cortical activation in the right TPJ. So the right TPJ is an important brain area in what's been labeled the social network, right? A social brain network. Seems to be important in terms of perspective taking, concern for others, empathy, these kinds of processes. You'll see that sanction-based compliers and non-compliers were kind of the same in terms of that brain activation. And so we wanted to say, well, what differentiates those two groups? And so we compared directly sanction-based versus non-compliers. And we found that they had increased activation, sanction-based compliers had increased activation in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This was bilateral, both left and right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, associated with sanction-based compliers. Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is very important in terms of a lot of executive function, cognitive control. And what this suggests at rest is that these individuals have a capacity, an increased capacity for cognitive control and self-regulation. However, this is an inference, so we wanted to find some additional evidence for that. So we took a look at a secondary task to get a different brain measure of essentially self-control capacity. And we used the, cued CPT task, right? So continuous performance task. What this is a reaction time task where people sit at a computer, they see letters appear one at a time on a screen. They know don't respond to distractors, so these letters. But when they see an O, this then says the next trial is important. So it primes you. And if the O is followed by an X, they hit a go button, right? So typically space bar. If the O is followed by anything else, they don't. They don't make a response. So here, these no-go trials are related to restraining a behavior that you've prepared. So it's related to response inhibition. And what we took was a measure of response inhibition capacity. It was an event-related potential to no-go trials, where this is essentially the neural response to an inhibited motor behavior. And you can see it right after it happens, which is a bit tough, right? It doesn't happen, but you can see it in the brain. It's a positive wave, about 250 to 500 milliseconds after the event, stimulus presentation. It occurs at typically midline electrodes, and it is a very common measure of self-control capacity. So the higher this wave is, this P300, the more self-control people tend to have, right? Better able at regulating that quick motor impulse. And what we found is that activation in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex that was measured at rest, completely different task, predicted no-go P300 amplitude, and then this mediated the effect of DLPFC activation on the amount of money transferred to the participant, or the responder. So this is consistent with the idea that the DLPFC is associated with self-control capacity, right? So it predicted self-control capacity in a different task, then this predicted how much they would give across the two different kinds of tasks, right? So here we find that we're able to explain how and suggest why people differ in terms of fairness norm compliance. We found three kinds of people. The first were voluntary compliers. These might be thought of as more other regarding kinds of individuals. They showed increased activation in the right TPJ, part of the social brain kind of network, important in perspective taking, empathy. That got cut off at the end. But it suggests increased concern for social preferences. We also found non-compliers. These are highly self-regarding individuals making very selfish kinds of choices. We found relatively reduced activation in the right TPJ and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Suggests increased selfishness and a decreased capacity to regulate themselves. So what's at the wheel seems to be their impulses, their ego. And sanction-based compliers were, yes, self-regarding, seemingly trying to maximize how much money they made in these tasks, but they also showed increased dorsolateral prefrontal cortex activation. And that allowed them to make more controlled, more strategic kinds of responses in this distribution game. And so they made the most money. And they seem to do it via a combination of selfishness, but increased control as well, being able to comply when it was necessary. Okay, so quickly end on discussion. So my general approach here, hopefully this was illustrated of this. We were able to demonstrate neural traits that are associated with different behavioral types and fairness norm compliance. We suggested why they might differ as well, based on where these neural traits were associated with. However, going forward, what do you do with this? Well, neural traits are stable, but they're not immutable. We know that there are training techniques that can change both neural structure and function. This includes things like meditation, practice, general training kinds of programs. And so it leaves the option open that perhaps these neural traits themselves could be changed as well. And maybe that would drive changes in social decision making. So potentially you could train self-control to increase norm compliance in future research. And it would be mediated by changes in these neural traits, including dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. All right, so I'll leave it there. Say thank you and open it to questions. This is very weird to hold. A mic is weird.
Yeah, just a question about the training that you mentioned in the last part. Have you guys done any training to see if there can be changes for non-compliers?
No, not at all. I would love to. There's a couple of reasons why. COVID's one. And two, it's generally hard in terms of what you have to do within that research. It takes a long time, takes resources, might not work, people drop out. But no, it's actually a very exciting kind of thing that you can harness what you've found in terms of explanations, sources of these individual differences, and then maybe tip them one way or the other. But no, we haven't gone that route yet. Yeah. Yeah, great question. That's one of the problems with some of the behavioral things. Harkens back to an old problem in behaviorism, right? That it's hard to explain. There might be different reasons for the same kinds of behaviors. So this kind of behavior, or rejection behavior, yes, it might be that it's fairness that's driving it. However, a rejection might be driven purely by what you seem to be suggesting was, it's kind of like an insult. How dare you do that to me? Give me that offer. And it might be driven by spite, or anger, or some kind of other social preference. So these are probably multi-determined, and people do mess around with these kinds of things. One of the ways that you can do that is if they're truly holding to a different kind of norm, that norm should show up across games, right? So you can give them different kinds of games where fairness is a concern, but if they flip in any way, you know that that kind of individual is not really concerned about fairness. What was driving it was something else. So that's one idea. Yeah.
If I understand the study, you were gathering data on the person who had the money and who was making the decision whether to be fair or not. What happens if you measure what happens in the person who is being treated fairly or not? Is there a correlate?
Great question. Maybe an answer to that one as well, because you seem to be more concerned about the responder too, right? Yeah. So we haven't done that. What were you thinking? A correlate? I didn't quite understand that part.
Whether similar areas of the brain are activated when it's treated unfairly as one chooses to behave unfairly.
Yeah, that's a good question too. There's two actual literatures on that as well, that some people think giving out punishment requires self-control, right? You're foregoing money to do the more social thing, so you're restraining this impulse, this greedy impulse to do the good thing. Other people think it's the other way around, right? Where the thing that requires self-control is to actually go for the money, where you have to restrain the natural impulses towards angry rejection and say, hey, one's more than zero, so that's the thing I want. So it's a great question, and currently a fight, I guess, in the literature, and a lot of angry researchers on both sides. Yeah.
I took a psychology class, I don't know how long ago, so
Yeah.
I can't remember it. For deviancy, does it matter if the person, let's say for example, is like a genius or a very smart individual? Is that considered deviant? Because the idea is about interest, right? So everybody wants fairness, and from the research and stuff that I used to read, kids even realize when things are fair, when things are not fair. They're like, they really debate when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then as adults, does it matter for society itself and for whether or not an individual comes in who seemingly doesn't cooperate with everybody else, and it's kind of, it's not a choice, but
Is this like an Elon Musk question?
Albert Einstein's,
Yeah, it's a good question.
ostracized simply because the others feel that they're unfair, just based off the fact
So where fairness might be a character, unfairness might be part of their character. And you know that, but you know that maybe punishment won't work or something like that.
Yeah, society finds a way to kind of, because it's not that they're deviant, but
Yeah.
but the way they're treated is deviant.
Yeah. Oh, interesting idea. No, I don't know of any sort of research kind of going down that track, but it's a really cool idea.
Yeah, but then, sorry, I have another one.
Yep.
For I think it's the threat you were talking about, is like no punishment, or non-punishment one, voluntarily. It makes sense that while threat increases, they increase in compliance. But then the sanction applies, in the picture you have was like a server at a bar or something. And then you said that, research shows.
Oops, there we go.
Yeah, the non-punishment condition says that they're so low, and compliance and there's no punishment for sure, and that's fine. All of them are low. But then it increases pretty dramatically with the punishment, with the threat condition. And then I just don't, if you could give us examples, like for sanctions, basically what, like police officers maybe, and like the sanction is basically back into law. It's something that promotes them to do this. Is that what you're saying?
In society, yeah. So in society, the sanctions are varied and they're like that. They can be rule-based, they can be law-based, they can be social-based. I focused on the social in the introduction. Here, the punishment is monetary based, right? I can deny you of the money you should be getting, right?
And then it's just the sanction base. Why does it increase so dramatically? Why would they?
Because they know, they're smart. They know what the fairness norm is, and they know what level they need to hit to avoid being rejected. That's why they made the most money.
So that's like CEOs, for example.
Yeah,
I see what you mean.
yeah. So people who are aware and they know how to get what they want.
They know the law.
Yeah,
I see what you mean.
yeah. All right, I think we're getting close. Yeah.
Did you notice a large difference between the number of people in each group? Like, were most people sanction-based, or?
Yeah, good question. Most people were sanction-based. The next was non-compliers, I believe. And the next was voluntary compliers, which is a bit sad. The nice people, I think, was the smallest group. Could be an artifact of the game. The game primes money. It's about monetary kinds of things, and maybe that reduces, you're getting the nicest of the nice, maybe. But yeah, I think those were the numbers. Yeah.
And was that like a big difference? Like,
Yeah. Enough for us to have power, but not a whole lot more in terms of finding these effects. Yeah.
This is more so like with the implications of what you found. So when it comes to, let's say, the historical development of Florida, I know this is it also is gonna track with like, let's consider the areas and how their voting records have been, but also their primary like export, which happen to be coal, lead, and a lot of toxic stuff that's not good for brain development.
In Florida.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know that.
So in those regions, because the development of certain regions of the brain was hampered.
So they have brain damage, is what you're saying?
Well, I mean, it was Florida man is usually tricky. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I think that there is a correlation between like occupational brain development and behavior.
Well, there is. Yeah, we know this. We know socioeconomic status is something that's predictive of brain development, that people low in socioeconomic status, they face more adversity, more stress, and it changes the way that the brain develops over time. They actually get worse at regulation. And that might be one of the best explanations of why they have such trouble in adulthood. They've gone through life being tuned towards stress. And so that's what they're made for, not for regulating it, not for being resilient, not for, yeah, comfortable, escape in a way. So, yeah, and we know that with lots of other kinds of variables as well. And there's a sense, this gets back at the other question, that these things are not immutable, right? You can change them over time. So experience, what you're doing, will change the way your brain functions, the way it's actually even structured.
Quick question from
Yep.
one of our R1 participants. So did you, Dr. Kyle Nash, search/find any other differences in the resting state EEG? As well, did you consider the other functions of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is involved in? And finally, as a second step to the question, also in the games, were the money units real money or fictional tokens?
Okay, start there. Real money. That's important, particularly to Swiss participants. Had to be real money. The first one was no, there were no other effects. And the middle one was, what was the middle question?
Any other effects with the dorsolateral?
Oh, considering other effects. So yes, of course, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex does a lot of stuff. And even the words I was using are very general, right? So there's definitely more basic kinds of things that it does. So it's related to working memory, it's related to cognitive control, goal maintenance, etc. So That's why we then did the supplementary analyses, where we needed more evidence to say what that brain activity is related to, right? So we didn't just rely on that initial inference, we wanted to back it up. And so we used another measure of self-control capacity, and found that they related. Sanction-based compliers had higher levels of both, and those predicted then in the same way the behavior. So that helped us feel more confident in the inferences we were making. Okay?
You were talking about like a person can go from being a voluntary complier to a non-complier. So I'm assuming this change is made in the long term. So is there a way you can make this change in the short term? And do negotiators use this switch in the short term to like get what they want from the other person?
Yeah, so, I should be repeating these, but now I haven't at all. Sorry, chat. So the question is, does essentially the context matter? Can you change people's behavior based on the context they're in? And yes, there's a lot of research that looks at different kinds of variables, different kinds of ways of changing what people want within the scenario, and changing how they make decisions within these social decision-making tasks, or what they go for. So there's very famous kind of simple priming tasks where, you know, they'll be in a room where there's a lot of pictures of business people and money, right? Or they'll be in a room with pictures of families and people building houses together. These change how people respond on the dictator game and the ultimatum game. Sample also matters. So Harvard Business School will respond differently than some liberal arts college in Northeast, right? And they find that that's quite different in terms of mean levels of selfish versus pro-social kinds of responses. So yeah, it's a good question.
Any last questions?
So you said that there were 3 different groups, compliers, non-compliers, and sanction-based.
Yep.
Were there personality trait differences? Like, how did you meet with these groups? Were there personality differences?
No, it's based on just their behavior and then analyzing what clumped together. So there were certain groups that were high in both. These were just the labels we gave them after. So behavioral pattern where they were high in both, these were the voluntaries. Their behavioral pattern, or a clump of data where no punishment, but then nearly fair in the punishment condition, and the non-compliers, which were sort of trying to figure it out, right? Low-ish, selfish essentially. So it's based on, it's data-driven, which was another feature that we liked. We weren't imposing what we thought. We were looking at the data tell us which groups these were. All right. Thank you. There we go.
Very insightful answers and great questions, everyone. Thank you so much. So just very shortly here, just a bit of a transition in the meantime. How's everyone doing so far? Awesome. Just checking in. So we hope everyone is having a great time thus far. We have great news. It's dinner time. Probably the moment y'all have been waiting for. So before we all rush to the table, just wanted to inform you that we have an array of sandwiches